여러분 안녕하세요.
Welcome back to our lecture.
Today, we will have a closer look at the Korean society, including its population and economy, its educational system, and some of its most important festivals.
We will also talk about Korean food.
You sure love Korean food, don't you?
I should. The amount of modernization and industrialization that has taken place in Korea since the middle of the 20th century has led to a lot of changes in many aspects of Korean life. Among these include a dramatic population increase over the past century and striking changes to the social fabric of Korea. Between 1960 and 2012, the population doubled from 25 million to 50 million, and at the beginning of 2021 surpassed 51.3 million, making South Korea the country with the currently 28th largest population. The continuous improvement of the living conditions is also reflected in a constant drop of infant mortality. The overall population increase, however, cannot divert from the fact that Korea is experiencing a constant decline in the total fertility rate. And while people are getting older and the average life expectancy currently lies at 83.5 years, with an average birth rate of under one child per woman, Korea brings up the rear in the international comparison. There are different reasons for the low reproduction rate, the most important of which are the high costs for rent and children's education, stress in an overall competitive society, or the difficulties for women to return to their jobs after childcare leave. The problem of the rapidly aging population is indicator and consequence of a fundamentally changing society. The traditional multi-generational households are noticeably decreasing and close to disappearing. The marriage age has risen to an average of over 30 years for both sexes, and while a growing number of adults stays unmarried, the divorce rates have increased about 10 times in the last 30 years. The rapidly aging society is a serious problem that also keeps the Korean government occupied to find solutions for the effects that the senior population might have on South Korea's workforce, economy, and military capabilities. The change of views on marriage and family life are just part of a development through which the established social norms undergo a closer re-examination. Confucian values, among which the most important are filial piety, patriarchy, ancestor worship, hierarchy, learning, familism, and collectivism, that still dominate the daily life, are pitted against the international answers to the demands and possibilities of modern societies. The last decades have also seen a change in ethnic composition of the population. Originally a mono-ethnic society, Korea has gradually come to accept more foreigners. In 2000, there were just 244,170 foreigners living in Korea, whereas in 2016 it was already around 2 million, which is close to 4% of the population. Aside from exchange students and foreign teachers and specialists, these foreigners often include migrant workers and migrant spouses. The increase of the population over the past century is naturally related to the growth of the economy. Here Korea has succeeded in a way that was unprecedented. Time for us to have a closer look at the Korean economy. Before the Korean wave swept around the globe and boosted the global interest in Korea, there was the rapid economic development that made the world take notice and opened the door widely for international cooperation and Korea's future development. Within a period of only 3 generations, Korea developed from one of the poorest countries in the world with a GDP of only $1.3 billion in 1953 to the nation with the 12th largest GDP of $1.53 trillion in 2017, a growth of almost 1,200%. Let's have a look at the internal and external preconditions for this boom that led to the present situation. During Japanese occupation, the Korean economy was supposed to serve the Japanese military expansionism. Heavy industries were installed in the resource-rich northern part of the peninsula, whereas the southern part was used for light industries and agriculture, and a railway system connected the different parts of the country. The country's separation following the Korean War thus had grave economic consequences, when the South was cut off from the energy sources of the North, whereas the North was lacking the food supply that the South had provided. Whereas the DPRK could benefit from Soviet relief shipments, the economic boom in South Korea could only gain momentum after the political instability had been overcome under President Park Chung-hee. His economic reforms laid the foundation for the South Korean economic growth, whose success can be attributed to a number of international and domestic factors. Speaking about the early external factors, we should mention the military and economic aid South Korea received from the US, a favorable export policy, a payment for the participation of Korean troops in the Vietnam War, as well as the effects of the Normalization Treaty with Japan in 1965. Among the internal factors, the active role of the Korean government in guiding, planning and controlling the economy and support for selected industries and corporations played a crucial role. The Korean workers themselves have been another factor. As they were driven by Confucian values, nationalism and state campaigns that appealed to their readiness to make sacrifices for the advance of their nation, they endured extreme working hours, poor working conditions, and an overall low payment for the benefit of their country. The boom in the 1980s and 1990s, with an average annual growth of 8.6%, was followed by an economic slump during the Asian financial crisis 1997 to 98, which South Korea coped with help from the IMF and by reforms of its financial system. Korea's economy even passed the global finance crisis 2008 to 2009 relatively smooth, partly due to the increased demand from the People's Republic of China and other newly industrialized countries. Korea has established itself as one of the world's leading economies in the production of ships, electronics, semiconductor chip technology, mobile phones, steel and cars. The industrial sector employs around 20% of the workers and contributes 35% to the GDP. The largest sector is the tertiary sector, which employs 63% of the workers and adds about 62% of the GDP. Agriculture only accounts for circa 3.2% of the GDP, but it gives employment to about 10% of the people. A main interest of the Korean foreign policy is to maintain good business relations with numerous countries. Biggest trade partners are China, the United States, the European Union and Japan. Economically, Korea can pride itself having achieved a superhuman development in shortest time, turning from a recipient of official development assistance into a strong donor. But this victory comes with a price. Compared to other OECD member states, the working conditions in South Korea are very hard, and the average labor hours are the highest of all OECD nations.
This economy miracle could not have come true if it were not for the Korean fervor for education. Since South Korea doesn't have many precious natural resources, education and know-how is the main resource the country's economy relies on.
Let's find out more about the Korean educational system. Eruditeness and lifelong learning are central virtues in the Confucian thought, which has been shaping Korean culture for centuries. Literacy in Chinese and a detailed knowledge of the Confucian classics constituted the center of educational efforts until the end of the Joseon dynasty. Education was the entrance requirement to the civil service exam system, and a successfully passed state exam opened the path to true power and influence. In theory, these examinations should have been open to everyone, but in practice it was a system that favored the members of the higher social class, who safeguarded their privileges and rejected egalitarian innovations like the Hangul writing system. For most people of the lower class, it was thus an unattainable goal. In late Joseon dynasty, the educational system began to change under the influence of increased contacts with foreign powers. Educational institutions opened for the lower class. The easier accessible Hangul became broadly accepted, and schools began to hire foreign teachers and invested into education of girls. But in 1910, Korea was annexed by the Japanese Empire, and among the many limitations, the educational system was no exception. Only about 5% of all Korean students were allowed to go beyond primary education, and when the Japanese occupation of Korea ended, around 80% of all Koreans had not received any formal education at all. Again, for the most of the people, it was an unattainable goal. Things changed with the defeat of Japan in 1945, and Koreans swarmed back to the schools and universities and began studying with a vengeance. In 1965, Korea already had one of the highest literacy rates worldwide, and this holds true for the present, where South Korea ranks constantly among the high achievers in the OECD Program for International Student Assessment. Education played an indispensable part in the economic miracle that catapulted South Korea within half a century from one of the poorest and undeveloped countries in the world among the highest educated, prosperous nations. The Korean school system consists of 1 to 3 years kindergarten, 6 years elementary school, 3 years middle school, 3 years high school, and 4 years university, junior colleges or graduate schools. School attendance for 9 years until the end of middle school is compulsory. In 2019, 70% of the Korean adults between 25 and 34 years had a tertiary degree, which raised the country a lot above the OECD country average of 45%. On the day of the National University Entrance Exam, the whole country comes to a standstill to make sure the examinees have the perfect conditions, without distraction or noise to focus on the test. This fervor for higher education, however, comes with a high price. Since education is seen as the main propeller of social mobility, everything in the life of young Koreans must center around studying to gain a high result in the college entrance exam, which determines the trajectory of their entire lives and careers. Graduating from a top university is the ultimate indication of a prestigious and respectable white-collar career path, and the promise of prestige and a high socio-economic status. But it comes along with a high level of stress and performance anxiety. Work and studying both can be a lot of stress. Let's change the topic to something more relaxing and talk about the Korean festival calendar. Traditional festivals are an important trait of every culture, as they convey the values that the society holds sacred. The festival calendar expresses the self-perception of a culture and structures time. Korea uses the Western solar calendar and adopted some of its most common holidays, but many of the traditional holidays and festivals come from the Confucian tradition that uses the lunar calendar. Until the middle of the 20th century, Korea was primarily an agricultural society, and many festivals were related with the course and seasonal rhythms of the agricultural year. The most important festival in the Korean calendar is Solal, or Lunar New Year's Day. Like the Chinese Spring Festival Chundia or the Vietnamese Tet Festival, it takes place on the second new moon after winter solstice, between January 21st and February 20th. Traditionally, it marked the beginning of the agricultural year. On Solal, the whole family is gathering and celebrating together. The rituals and customs performed include sebe, a kotao to the elder generations of the household, charye, a ceremony in reference and commemoration of the ancestors, and occasionally a game of yunori. The traditional dish for Solal is tteokguk, a broth with thinly sliced rice cakes, which according to the tradition is believed to bring good luck and to gain a year of age if you eat it on New Year's Day. This, however, only counts once. Taeborum, a celebration during which the fields are prepared and the unity of the local community is strengthened with games and food, and Hanshik, which announces the start of the farming season, are other important festivals of the first half of the year. Sowing in spring and harvest in autumn mark the cornerstones of the agricultural year, and a counterpart to Solal is Chuseok, the Korean Thanksgiving that takes place on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, under a full moon. Koreans visit the ancestor grave sites and perform charye rites, enjoy themselves with dances, games, or shirim, a Korean wrestling match. A characteristic food of the festival is sungpyeon, small rice cakes with sweet fillings, steamed over a layer of pine needles, which gives them a distinct flavor. Contact with foreigners also had an influence on the Korean festival calendar, and the most important Western holidays found their way into Korean culture. Christmas and Solar New Year's Day both are public holidays in Korea, while Easter is only relevant for Korean Christians. Christmas does not have the same significance as it has in Western countries. For young couples, it more resembles a Valentine's Day featuring Santa, while for others it just might be a welcome break from the laborious daily grind. That, though, doesn't keep the industry from providing a lot of Christmas merchandise. Aside from these examples, there are a number of unique festivals that are directly related to Korean history and culture. The March 1st Movement Day commemorates the Korean independence movement against the Japanese occupation in 1919. Jaehonjol, or Constitution Day, celebrates the proclamation of the Constitution on July 17, 1948, while Gwangbokjol, the National Liberation Day, reminds people of the defeat of Japan on August 15, 1945. The National Foundation Day, Gaejeonjol, on October 3rd, celebrates the mythic foundation of Go-Joseon in 2333 BCE, while Hangul-nal, the Hangul Proclamation Day, on October 9th pays tribute to the invention and proclamation of the Korean writing system.
We've just mentioned a number of special foods and dishes that are eaten during certain festivals. This is a good chance to talk a bit more about the Korean culinary culture and some of its dishes.
This choice won't be easy. There are so many types of Korean food that are worth discussing, and trying, but we'll have to limit our discussion to a few interesting examples.
Yes.
Food and culinary traditions are a very distinct expression of a culture. They are also an international recognizable feature. A national cuisine doesn't mean there is no overlapping with the cuisine from other countries, but there are certain preparation methods, food arrangements and condiments that make it distinguishable from food originating in other cultures. A simple Korean meal consists of rice or noodles, a soup and a variety of side dishes or banchan. These side dishes are a very distinct feature of the Korean cuisine, and the broad variety that comes with a more complex meal in a traditional restaurant alone can make the visit worthwhile. The most famous example is kimchi, a side dish made of salted and fermented vegetables like cabbage or radish, and a varying selection of seasonings that can be found on almost every Korean lunch table and is also used in many main dishes. That reminds me of a German dish called sauerkraut. It is also made of fermented cabbage and has many uses.
The method used for these two dishes is similar, but not quite the same, and the taste is very different.
Fermented food exists in many cultures. Before the age of refrigerators, this was a practical way to preserve food for a long time. While there are vegetarian options, Korea is a great place for meat lovers. Korean barbecue is nowadays one of the most popular items in Korean cuisine in and outside of Korea. The meat, which can be marinated, like in beef bulgogi, or be plain, is often fried directly at the table and usually eaten wrapped in a lettuce or a perilla leaf, like the famous pork belly samgyeopsal. And one of the most common after-work finger food is deep-fried chicken in various seasonings, usually relished together with beer, a combination that is so popular that it has even led to the creation of a neologism, chimek, from chi, chicken, and mek from mekju, the Korean word for beer. Kimbap is another famous finger food, and also another example where the outer appearance is misleading the assumption about the taste. Kimbap looks very similar to Japanese maki sushi, but has a very distinct taste due to the rice not being made with vinegar, the different filling, and most importantly, the usage of sesame oil or chamkirim. This chamkirim is one of the typical ingredients that creates the specific taste of many Korean dishes. Tteok is a class of rice cakes made with steamed flour out of a variation of grains, including glutinous and non-glutinous rice, that you can't get around if you are living in Korea. Koreans absolutely love tteok, that is used in many different variations, both in special as in everyday dishes. Tteokguk is a rice cake soup that, eaten at Lunar New Year's Day, is believed to grant another year of age. Pindetteok is a fried pancake made from mung beans. During Chuseok, people love to eat sungpyeon, half-moon-shaped tteok with a filling of various seeds, nuts, fruits, beans, spices, and honey. And tteokbokki, glutinous rice cakes in a sweet and spicy chili sauce, is by far the most popular street food. The love for tteok also shows in the many Korean proverbs that include it, such as krimi tteok in the picture, meaning it's not real, no matter how much you wish it. Nammi tteokgi toko poenda, other people's tteok always looks bigger, or the grass is green on the other side. And nuoso tteok mokki, lying down eating tteok, meaning piece of cake, very easy. Street food is not a unique feature in Korean cuisine, but it has its special features that are worth knowing. In the evening, the pojangmaja, movable tent diners, offer additional alcohol and snacks. among which the most famous are dried or fried ojingo, squid, gopjang, sautéed pork intestines, all kind of twigim, deep fried food, and tteokbokki. Korea is one of the countries with the highest per capita alcohol consumption in the world. This may be due to the immense pressure that was put on the people during the booming authoritarian period. You don't drink alone. Drinking is following a set of cultural rules and it serves a social function. During drinking, it becomes also partially possible to circumvent strict social rules and hierarchies. We mentioned a lot of Korean dishes, but it still feels like we barely touched on this topic.
There are really a lot more, but we can only give you an introduction, and I hope you will try to find out more on your own.
In a Korean restaurant, we can explain a lot, but you have to taste the food yourself to really understand it.
But be careful, Korean food is spicy. Our lecture has come to an end. Once again, we hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back for the next lecture, when we will talk about Korean literature.